Anyway, hello everybody. I'm Evan Abrams. Welcome to Motion Design Hotline. We're back. We weren't with you last
Very
week, but
professional show.
yeah, a very professional show about motion design with these two guys. I'm Evan Abrams, joined as usual by Kyle Hamrick. Kyle, you were just in
I
Las
was just
Vegas.
in the city of
Oh,
Angeles.
oh, sorry, I got the
Yeah,
wrong glass in there. Oopsie doodle.
yeah,
Kyle,
yeah,
Kyle, how
yeah.
was
I was
that?
in yeah, I was in LA for Adobe Max last week, which was a blast. Exhausting, but it was a great time. And if Val is still in the chat, which I assume she is, hi. I actually got to meet her very briefly. We sort of like crossed paths as she was coming hot off of an Adobe Live, and I was going in. That's a quick changeover, but it's a great time. If you've never been to Adobe Max, I highly recommend it. It's very creatively inspiring, and you get to meet all your design heroes, and it's really cool.
Well, Kyle, we cannot belabor about the past. We must focus on the present. So, hello, everybody who's hanging out with us in the chat. Hey, Penny, Umacorn, Zed by HP, what's going on? Rick H, let us know, everyone. Oliver Andrews, hello, hello. Tim Mobest, hey. So, let us know, people of the chat, where you're from, who you are, what are you doing. Kyle, what are we doing today? What did we prepare for this?
Oh, you tell me. I've been all over the country lately. As you can
Okay,
see, I'm coming today from my very temporary studio in some other city. Um, but nominally, I believe we're talking about radial arrays, and because we
right.
have to have cute names on everything, we made it into a radial array rodeo. So we'll see what that brings.
Yeah, this has been kind of a roundabout way of rolling
Mm-mm,
into the
mm-mm.
show here. It's an excuse to make some puns. If you've
Yep,
been with us for our previous shows, we've talked about arrays that are grids. We've talked about various alignments of stuff, trying to control big groups of things, and so we've kind of come into the final one of those, which is a radial array, things arranged around in a circle. We're going to look at, I think, about four techniques, maybe more if we've got time, but
yep.
there's kind of four main ones that we're going to get to. But yeah, that's our focus for today. So if you've ever needed to put a bunch of stuff around a central axis and then control those in a type of system, then hopefully today is going to give you those ideas. And hopefully there's going to be chapter markers you can jump around to the different techniques and stuff. Anyway, Kyle, why don't we start off with you? I think you've got some of the good, let's say
I
the,
do
the
have
kind of,
some nice basic builds here to kind of get you in the right headspace. Yes. I mean, this is definitely and up here on my screen, I will point out since we were talking about it,
yeah,
a lot of the sessions from Adobe Max, there are quite a few things that are available on demand already, just for free. I think you have to, sort of sign up for Max, but a lot of the things that happened live were recorded, and so you'll be able to watch those soon as well. So if you want to see some of my sessions, for example, you can sign up to get reminded when they're all available. I'm not sure how long it'll be, but just enough time for them to process things. Um,
they need
so the
to edit a
first
lot
thing,
of cussing out.
oh yeah, so much. The first thing that I'm going to do is make this little array right here, which is just, as Evan was saying, you got, some things around a circle. All right. I have used stuff like this, probably I'm approximating here, but 7 million times in my career, because this is such, it's just a very clean way to, if you have a bunch of icons or sort of different things. If you've seen any of the, cutesy stuff I've been doing with the new 3D objects that you can import to After Effects beta still, this is a great way to kind of put things around here, and then you can just turn these 3D objects and rotate your null back a little, and then it looks really cool like this. It's kind of an easy way to make things look neat and flow around. So um, let's take a second and maybe like 6 seconds and just kind of talk through how we would build something like this. This is a great way to kind of take advantage of the structural way that After Effects works. And with just a little bit of thought, you can set this up pretty easily and make it so that you can control it.
Right, using the power of our minds and some
Yes,
light expressions.
very, very light. And honestly, that's not always necessary. So what I have here is just one little pre-comp. It's a photo, a circle with a photo in it. Okay. And so I'm just going to make several copies of this. This could certainly all be different things. The setup is the same. So
It
I'm
could
going
be
to go
anything.
ahead. It could be literally anything. Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and make, let's say, 8 copies of this, okay? And the number of copies of this is very relevant. And in this case, it's not going to be the most like dynamic setup, but if you know how many of these things you need, then it's not that hard to set up for it.
Mm.
So I'm going to go ahead and select all of these. And, the properties panel would be great for this. I'll admit that because I'm on a single screen today, I'm working with a little less screen real estate than I might normally have. Let me see if I can adapt. Here we go. So you could certainly do these down in the timeline, but you can also use our friend, the properties panel here. And I'm just going to size this down a bit, okay? And then I'm also going to go ahead and offset the anchor point of this to get this kind of over about here. I'm just sort of ballparking. So you'll see the layer looks like it's over here, but you still have the anchor point of all of these right here in the center of the comp, okay? And that's really crucial.
Right.
The
point at which the layer believes that it is, right? It thinks that it is there.
And so other properties like scale, for example, if I were scaling, see how it's scaling from that anchor point? And more importantly, if I were to rotate these, see where I'm going? It rotates from that anchor point. And so now all we have to do is just kind of space these out around a circle. Before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and create what's called a null object, because that's going to be kind of my pivot point that all of these can operate around. You just come up here to layer, new, null object, and you get this little red square on the screen.
And pretty much any time we're thinking about, we have to control a bunch of stuff, maybe our mind should be thinking about null objects. Maybe.
Yes. Yeah. They don't export. They're never visible. So they're just a great little control layer for whatever you need to do. I'll go ahead and be a good boy here and just rename this like pivot. Okay. And so I'll go ahead and highlight all of these things. Let's change this over to the switches just so we don't have that visual confusion, and I can hide stretch. And I'll go ahead and parent all of these to that pivot point. And remember, their anchor points are right here, which happens to be the center of the comp. So that's right where the nulls point is as well. Okay. So we're going to rotate each of these, and we're going to do it in sort of an intentional way. Evan, do you happen to know off the top of your head what 360 degrees divided by 8 is?
Oh, I'm gonna say 45. Is that
okay? Well, that's a fair
right.
guess. But you know what? If we don't want to do that math, we can just type right here 360 divided by 8, and now we know 45. Okay.
Oh,
so what I could do, yeah. So 45 plus 45, and then you could say 45 times 3. Tab, tab, 45 times 4, tab, tab, 45 times 5, tab, tab. Get the idea here. 45 times 6, 5 times 7. And then, of course, this one would be back at the top. So it's 360 degrees. Did I make one too many? No. Perfect. Okay. So this is effectively at 0 here. All right. So even if you have some strange number of these, let's say you have 17 of these that you need to get around a circle, the math isn't always going to be something that right off the top of your head, like 45. So you can just use After Effects' little math capabilities to do that for you. And you're like, okay, but we've got a couple issues here in that obviously they're all sort of rotated here, which may not be what we want. And, now like all of their anchor points are still in the middle. So what if I wanted to resize one of these? Well, not great. Maybe that's the kind of animation you want, but maybe not. Remember, we parented all of these to the null. So we can use that. We can use that to control all of them. I can rotate that null and it rotates the whole rig here, right? But because those are now parented, I can center out the anchor points, put them back to the center of each point. There's a couple different hotkeys for this, but I'm going to hit Control Alt Home or Command Option Home if you're on a Mac. And you can see that reset each layer's anchor point back to its own center. Okay. And so now I could call up that rotation property again, just zero all of them out, and looky there. They're all rotated back the way they need to be, but we can still rotate all of them. Not quite where we want though, because they're also, if I turn the circle too much, they're all turning upside down.
Right.
Well, here's that very easy expression that Evan talked about. On each rotation property for each of these little icons or whatever you want to call them, I'll alt click and I'm going to create an expression here. I'm just going to link it back to that pivot rotation. And then if I just put a little negative at the beginning, so it's going to look at that thing and be the negative of that. And in this case, that's a great little formula. I'll go ahead and do that to all of them. Just copy, paste across all of these layers. And in this case, that's a great little formula to keep all of them facing straight up as you rotate the main central null there. And you can take this further. If you wanted, you could like add a little angle expression control here, effect expression controls angle control. And so you could actually tie them to the angle control and then to the layers rotation. So you could like rotate all of them at once from this, but still have them stay straight up if you wanted them to. Like, you know, this is just sort of your starter thing. But now you have, you know, the ability to take each of these and like resize them in their current, you know, kind of relative position around the circle here. And I feel like this is pretty straightforward to set up if you kind of think through the, you know, the way that it works so that you can take advantage of that, not have to try to manually eyeball the positions of all these.
True. And I was wondering, maybe you're going here, maybe you're not, but let's say we wanted to, let's say a producer came in and said, I would actually like 9 Evans around the circle, right?
Right.
If we could set it up to say be, I'm trying to think, because there'd be a bit more work to make it like relative to the layers index, right?
You absolutely can. That does take a little more work. And there are some other ways to do that. I didn't necessarily prep for that. I can go through it if we want, but I feel like that may take a little bit more time. But really all you have to do is you kind of think about, you could set each layer's rotation relative to that original null, kind of the way that I rotated them when I built it out there. Instead of doing hard numbers, you could say create a slider on this control null, and it says 8 in this case, or it could go up to 10 or whatever. And each layer's kind of original rotation effectively would be 360 divided by whatever that slider is. And so then you're starting to set up a more dynamic way of moving them around the circle relative to how many there are. In that case, obviously, you may need to kind of think through, you might need another intermediate null in between each one. So like you have a central null and then maybe a null for each icon so that you can kind of set up these easier rotational relationships, but it still lives in the place that you want and you can scale it or whatever. It kind of just depends on like how many layers of control you need for what you're doing with the animation, you know? And some of these builds like this, you can make it more dynamic if that's what you need. But a lot of times, you know exactly, you know, you probably got a static design that tells you exactly how many of these you need. And then you can be a little more thoughtful about just making that thing. But I like something like this because each of these layers, you know, you can still animate the position and scale and even rotation of each individual layer as part of this setup. So you could have them all, you know, rotate into place in the circle or offset that timing or whatever, but you still have this nice central control for whatever. And you could, of course, scale all of them. This is, you know, a good way you could kind of scale it in as it's spinning, whatever your project calls for, really.
It's true, because like, since they're part of that array, you can work backwards. You can get into the array. You can get them out of the array. You can do stuff with them. I don't know. It's all a fun dance. I want to call out some excellent puns that are going on in the chat right now, which is great.
I'm missing them.
Yeah, well, you know, it's we got Tim talking about wanting his own Evan Abrams, which I think is nice.
Oh.
That's great.
You know what those folks in the chat may enjoy, Evan?
What?
You know, as I recall, we named this the Radial array Rodeo, and this is not the most like Western photo of you. So I did add a little cowboy hat.
Oh, good. Boy, howdy. That's...
Yeah. Yeehaw.
Well, giddy up, partners. Let's saddle up for some more examples. I'm going to jump on over to my screen over here real quick. So, Kyle, you were talking about how the structure of the thing really depends. Like, that's going to change what we can actually do with the thing, right? And I think kind of dovetailing off of that, that is nowhere more apparent than if we were to do this using repeaters. So
Yes.
we're gonna get a little repetitious here. Actually, the whole show is going to be pretty repetitious as we sort of do the same thing 4 times in 4 different ways. But here you can see we got a clock right now. Most clocks have hour marks and then seconds marks, and
This is what clocks look now, like now, Evan. I'm not sure what world you live
oh,
in.
sorry.
Yeah, they're just rectangles.
Now, Kyle, what do phones look like in the year 2023? I'm not
It's
totally.
that big hand crank thing, and you go, hello, hello.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Three ring 7 operator, connect me to Western Union. So we've got these clock ticks. Sorry, minutes. It wasn't seconds. Don't no one correct me. So here we've got basically 2 setups. One where you can think of it modularly, like we've got an hour tick and then 4 minute ticks, and then that is repeated 12 times, which allows us to do this thing where each of them behave like a little segment, right? And then another way of setting it up is one element that's repeated 60 times, and then one element that is repeated 12 times. And also glad to hear people are enjoying our old time radio voices. Our what is it?
We should do a whole episode with only those.
Don't worry, we're gonna do. We'll make sure we do an episode that's about like old timey film effects. We should do that on
Yeah,
a thing.
there you go.
Then
Perfect.
we'll both talk in mid-Atlantic accents. It'll be great. Talk about snake oils and how FDR is gonna finally get that New Deal pushed through. Is that Kyle? I'm not super familiar with American history. I don't know if those things
It's way
line up.
better because you're not.
Okay, good. I don't know your crazy history. So that's the idea, right? So structurally, that's what we want to set up. And in order to do that, let me just show you how it happens kind of from scratch, right? So let's make a radial repeat. And I'm just going to go ahead and start by making some rectangles. So I'll make sure that this has a nice solid fill for us to enjoy. And we're going to bring the size. So if we twirl into the contents, you're going to see a group called Rectangle 1. Just keep in mind, if you're new to shape layers, if you're new to After Effects, this is better termed as group called Rectangle 1.
Mm-hmm.
And
Exactly.
And it's full of a bunch of things. Like it's filled with a path. So this is describing how big is the rectangle at all, and where is that rectangle. So let's make something that is like 20 by 100. So that's a pretty, well, let's get more exaggerated. Let's go 20 by 200, something like this, right? And where does that live? So this has a position about where it is. And you can see as I'm moving it around, there is a slightly different anchor point thing in there, right? That is describing the middle center of this particular layer. So if I move the layer over there, it's in a different place. Now, all these relative things are going to come in real handy real soon. So
yeah, shape layers are a little tricky for some folks because the layer itself has the regular layer transforms, but then everything that you create inside the shape layer can potentially have its own little transform properties relative to the layer on which it lives.
Right. And so if you check out, for example, here in the timeline, you're going to see the contents and then the transform. And if you look over here into the properties, I'll just get rid of that library so we can get properties a little bit bigger. You can see we've got layer transform and then layer contents and then shape properties, shape transform, like so many great things going on over here in the properties, and it helps to delineate those things. Anyway, that's going to be super helpful when we start thinking about how do we want to set this up hierarchically, right? So let's change the name of this group. Let's change it to big ticks, right? These give me our big hour demarcation around the perimeter of this thing. So in order to do that, I need to add to this a repeater. And where should the repeater go, right? That's kind of the big question. Like, should I put it here? Should I put it even outside of the group, right? And you'll notice if I put the repeater above big ticks, nothing's happening because it's repeating nothing, and then big ticks happen. So the repeater's got to be either under it, or maybe it's got to be under here, or maybe it's got to be under here. It's got to be repeating something.
Like to use the analogy, you know, that when you're putting effects on layers, sort of each effect is looking at everything before it in the stack, right? And
Yeah.
these operators on shape layers, like trim paths or repeater or anything like that, they work the same way. They take whatever they're getting from anything previous, and that's what they affect.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people sometimes get confused with like, what is the order of the things? Is it
Yeah.
flowing down? Is it flowing up? If you think about a signal being piped into the top of something and then results flowing out of the bottom of it, that sometimes helps. If anyone, you know, if we can go back to our mid-Atlantic accents, if you remember back in the day when you would literally be physically putting things in an order in a synthesizer, right? That it would literally feed into this and out of that and into this. Anyway, we're getting into crazy town. So
We could do a whole episode on just the structure of shape layers, probably.
Yeah.
Maybe we will someday.
Yeah, sure. But people can piece it together from context clues. But
Yeah.
let's give ourselves 12 ticks, and you can see that they're being pushed off. Now, that's because down here in the transform, right now it's saying, how shallst I transform each of the copies? So each one is now 42 pixels away, positive 42 pixels or whatever. I'm going to say 0. I'd like it to go 0 pixels away from each other. And what I want it to do is to rotate. So if I'm going to rotate one away from the next. And in fact, because math is hard, I'm going to hold down Option, click on the rotation, and I'm going to type in 360 divided by, and then point our pick whip to the copies. So that is going to, I've made a lovely asterisk here. So 360 degrees divided by the number of copies means that they're going to be perfectly spaced out by, in this case, 30 degrees. It doesn't look like a clock yet because I need to move these away from the middle of this thing. So if I give them a little push like that, I know you can kind of see that we can do some fun things playing around with this, right? Now, importantly, I'm changing the position of the rectangle path, right? And because that occurs first, and then this, and then this, and then it is repeated, that's why we end up with this array. I'm going to bring this down to 0, and I'm actually going to bring our repeater outside. Now, Kyle, I apologize. I feel like this is going to take a little bit longer than I had planned because we're going on a bit of a diversion.
You do you, buddy.
Okay, thank you. So bringing it outside, you notice that I have caused an oopsie, right? I'm getting an error on here, and that's because the address for this has changed. So I need to make sure that this is indeed pointing to the right place. Kabam! Now we're back in action.
Shape layers don't. If you restructure them after you make an expression, they just don't remember the address. Bummer.
They can't do it. It's difficult.
Yeah.
You know, it's hard to remember where you are sometimes. So in here, I wanted to do that because now I'm going to change the transform of the group called big ticks, and this is repeating big ticks, right? You can type that out. And that means that I can now change, say, the transform of the group that this lives in, which means if you wanted to, say, skew the axis like this, you want to do kind of like a James Bond thing, right? You're able to have a bit more control over the thing that is repeated. So remember, this group is called big ticks, or maybe let's just call it one big tick, right? Maybe that'll make this one big tick. Kyle, we have to remember that people might want to download these files later from motiondesignhotline.com. So there we go. And so this has given us control. I can control this group. And remember that this group is relative to the universe it lives in, and why so is the repeater. And since it thinks of the middle center of the layer as where things should rotate around, that's why we end up with this. So there we go. We've got our hour demarcation, which is great. I'm going to go ahead and add a group. All right, and so we've got that. I've just broken the thing again.
Yeah,
Kyle, I keep breaking it. I just keep smashing this thing with a hammer.
Yeah.
It's my favorite.
Human wrecking ball, Evan or Abrams.
Evan or Abrams. Okay, so this is the big ticks. So I can duplicate the big ticks, and let's call this the lil ticks. So if we remember everything that was going on inside of the lil ticks, I'm going to go ahead and let's give this a different color. And let's, our fabulous fuchsia that we like to have on this program. And so let's call this one lil tick. Maybe that's what our old time radio play would be. It's called Lil Tick.
Lil Tick. Yep.
And it's about a rail riding hobo who goes around America jumping on one boxcar after another like a tick, right? Draining the blood from their enemies, I guess. Yeah, a hobo vampire.
We'll workshop it. Yeah.
Kyle, people of the chat, let us know what you think of hobo vampire. So we've defined the one lil tick, and then we're going to be repeating lil tick. And so by repeating lil tick, we got to say how many copies we want, and we want to make sure that this is pointing to the right place. So let's make sure that, okay, since it's looking at big ticks, that's totally wrong. We want to look here, so it is looking at this, and we want 60 of them. Boom. So there we go. That's working out. And now we just want to make sure that this group here, transform of one lil tick, is in the right place. It's up there like that. And now the order of these is going to be important so that one kind of overlaps the other like that. Would you look at that? You've got a pretty cool clock going on. Now,
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that happened there, right? So let's think about what we might want to animate about this if there was something that you wanted to do. You might say, I want to do something about the rotation of elements, right? Well, there's a lot of rotations going on in here. There's this rotation that you could play with. There is this rotation that you could play with. Let's see. This one here, right? Because this has been sort of solidified at 30. Maybe I want to actually just remove that. And let's just say, Kyle, I can do math. I don't need to prove it to anybody, but I'll just type in 30 there. And so we might say keyframe this if we wanted this to kind of expand out from there. So let's do something like that. Let's come down to this one. I'll remove that, and I'll just remember that this is the number 6, so that is going to look good. And so if we wanted these two things to kind of expand outward, they would go from 0 to 30 and 0 to 6 respectively, and we end up with that happening, right? That type of a thing. Because you don't want to see me do that all kind of... Refurb, please do not post Evan's private links in the chat.
The chat is in rare form today, and I'm mostly just glancing at it, but I'm pretty sure Val has agreed to finance our old-timey film.
Oh, okay.
I'm just going to say that that's what's happening.
Okay, perfect. So if we just dive into this example here, I'm going to tap the U key a couple of times to bring up everything that's kind of changed about this. Or, I'll just tap the U key once so that we just have the kind of keyframe. So you can see the journey that these are going on, and I'll solo this layer so you can see. So what is happening here? Well, I'm changing the size and position of the tick, right? And then we're doing some rotating and then changing the repeating degrees as it comes out. And then it's packing itself up using size and position again. So that's really all that's happening there. Now, what is structurally so different about this other repeater here, right? This other...
We'll tell them.
Yeah.
Stay mysterious.
I'm going to
Keep
tell
them
you.
wanting more.
That's what we do. We only tell you half of the things here on the Motion Design Hotline. Okay, so what we got here, I don't know, Val's going to rob a stagecoach in order to finance our...
This is the influence we have.
Our radio play. Yeah, I know. Okay,
Yep.
So in here, the structure is very different. So we have big tick, we have little tick group, and then we have a repeater that's repeating all of them. What's really nice about shape layers is you can actually toggle off the little eyeball next to them so we can kind of segment what we're looking at. So if we look at the lil tick group, you can see that what we've got in there is a rectangle path. We've got some changes to its position, right? Because it's coming out there as well. But the lil tick group also has a repeater. So we're repeating a repeater twice so that we're getting extra repetitions out of this thing. So we're basically creating one unit, then we're repeating that, and that's what allows us to have this structure kind of go through. Anyway, if you want to really dissect that, if you want to really get into it, this is a bit of a tease, so you can go to motiondesignhotline.com and download those files to enjoy them after the show. You got to do it after the show. That's your
Motiondesignhotline.com, a real website. For real people.
That's right. Real website, real people, real projects. And so yeah, this is kind of the idea. Now I'm trying to think if there are other things. Kyle, is there anything else germane about this that I should kind of dive
Well,
into?
I think a good, I mean, this is starting to segue a little bit, but a
Okay.
good thing to point out here, um, that when you're using shape layer repeaters, you don't get the ability to individually control those copies of the thing. And so we're
Right.
kind of seeing here, you're making some different groups. And so you can control, all the copies of the thing that that group is, and you can do that individually. But as our buddy Reverb Mike has been hinting at, using text around a path can be a good way to build something like this too, and that would give you a little more, well, a lot more if you want it, individual control over these. But
Yeah. So
as
just to kind of
yeah,
highlight
the
that,
theme
right?
of a lot of these, the what you need to do with the thing helps dictate how you build it.
Yeah. And so you're mentioning, what can we actually change about the individual like units of the thing, right?
Hmm.
So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to really quickly, let's say we wanted to change some kind of rotation. So you see transform of the big tick, I could rotate that. And if we come down, we've got a transform of the lil tick. So we could go like that. But we come down even more and we get the transform of the little tick group, right? So that has an expression that's kind of on it, but we can offset that and jog that through. And then let's see, what else have we got going on? We've got a transform of this kind of repetition of the whole thing. So if you wanted that to unfurl, we've got that going on. And then finally, the rotation of the whole layer. So these are all of the things that you can enjoy because we've set it up to have all of these various components.
Hmm.
But yes, we don't have what we would describe as an addressable array. So
Yeah.
addressable meaning I can't talk to this.
Number 17 or something. Yeah.
Exactly. I can't say you only do this. Kyle, if only there was a system inside of After Effects that allowed us to
If only.
address all these things. But, surely that can't be the case.
Whoa! Yeah. So if you know me, you know that I do all kinds of silly stuff with text animators, and this is a case where it's really great. One thing that is a little bit of maybe a weakness here is that it's a little harder to be sort of mathematically precise in terms of positioning things. You have to eyeball it a little bit more, but then you get the ability to control individual characters, or you can do things like time offsetting. You could have these pop into place, but with a shape layer, they all are going to pop into place at the same time.
Yeah.
But with a text layer, you could have it so they go all around. So it just kind of depends on what you need, right? So in
Hold
this
on, let me see if we
example
can do that
here,
again, and I'll try to harmonize the next time you do that.
I mean, you want me to? I'll do it.
Yeah.
Okay, ready?
One,
Ba, ba, ba,
two,
ba, ba,
three.
ba, ba.
Ba, ba, ba,
Ba,
ba,
ba,
ba,
ba,
ba,
ba, ba,
ba,
ba,
ba,
ba,
ba,
ba,
ba,
ba.
ba. Yeah. Okay.
Needs
Perfect.
a little work.
Yeah. Mr. Sandman, make me a text
Um,
array.
so I'm gonna make Mr. Sunman here. I'm in
Oh, okay.
Arizona today, and the sun feels very powerful when you step outside. So this is appropriate here. So this is a text layer. I'm kind of taking advantage of a couple effects as well to do this, but you can see how I've got some nice little wiggly wobbles. And this particular thing, you could totally build this with a shape layer as well, but with the amount of what I'm actually doing with it here. But let's take a look at how this is constructed and see if we can kind of think through the process. Because I do have teaser, a little example here that's like taking advantage of a lot more individual movement.
Right.
So these are the characters that we're actually working with. It's just two straight lines of a bunch of this little Unicode triangle. In this case, I'm using Arial, but any font that actually has access to these Unicode characters, which are usually like more basic system fonts, you can do something like this. You could use letters too, whatever you want. And in this case, I'm just going to take an ellipse here, and this one's probably not going to be perfect, but I'm going to draw a circular mask on the layer. Let's maybe change that color so it's a little more visible here. So you can see that circular mask. And then as you twirl open the text layer, one of the many options you get under path options, you can apply your text to a mask. And from here, it's kind of just fine tuning things. I'll want to reverse this so that they're pointing outwards. And then I'll need to kind of play with the tracking until, see, it's sort of like, you might want to scale your characters or play with the tracking or whatever it is you need to do to kind of get them to perfectly go around your circle or whatever other shape you want them to be following. Doesn't need to be a closed path either. This could just be, a line. So once you get that kind of lined up, and as you saw, this is kind of eyeballing it to get this. So if you need that absolute precision, this sometimes isn't the technique for you. In this case, this layer has a handful of effects and then a handful of text animators. So I'm kind of using one text animator to apply. It's a little harder to see here. Maybe I'll size this down. Sorry, that's not gonna. I shouldn't be hitting these hotkeys. I think we learned from my Skype day that one time that sometimes hotkeys are bad.
Don't let the hotkeys betray you.
Yeah, let's fit to width so you can actually see this. So this one's just kind of applying a little bit of a gradient. There's a few things happening in here. And then I'm using another text animator in heavy air quotes to actually just sort of set things to a different size and placement here, okay? And fill color again. So see how this one is doing, it's changing the position, scale, and fill color of only specific characters. In this case, that second line. So they're a little bit offset. And then here I've got what's called a wiggly selector. So it's just kind of wiggling them, 10% in scale in either direction so that they can kind of all sort of do this kind of business, right? There's some other keyframes on the layer itself. And I think I accidentally set one a minute ago when I was repositioning this. And then there's one to kind of like have the characters pop on from the beginning. And again, see how we can offset some of these different groups of things. So in this case, when it's actually all applied to the one layer, and then I'm actually telling a fill effect on the layer to fill that circle in just to kind of get that middle back, right? Without needing another layer for it. Then you can do something neat like this. And in this case, this is really just a slight offset of line 1 comes on, line 2 comes on, and then they all have some dancey qualities to them. So I'm more using the text animators to kind of like color them and position them in this case than I really am like individual controls too much.
Right. But if you wanted to talk to an individual ray of that, if you want to talk to only one triangle, you could get that granular with your range selector
I could do it.
If you so desired.
Let's go ahead and just kind of grab some of these here. It does get a little wonky to try to like visually select characters.
Yeah.
But let's see if I can just kind of do it with the thing here. Let's say animate position. Okay. And so this is, we'll just kind of take one and you'll see it's going to affect all of them to start because I haven't set a range yet. I'm just changing their Y position. So in this case, it pushes them off the path, which is serving as their baseline, right? And if I dial in this range selector, let's say index, so it's an actual number, and there's 34 total characters here. So if I want, this one character, I can just kind of dial in the numbers of what that character is. And I could even go so far as to animate this property of this one specific character, or I could make this wider and say, these characters. Or you can use something called an expression selector, and I could say between this range, get every third character. You can get pretty granular with this if you want.
Yeah, and like I don't know, this is great when we're talking about the powerful damaging effects of the atoms bombarding you from the sun.
Yeah.
Although that doesn't really line up with our old timey theme because I think they loved cooking themselves in the sun back in the 50s.
Yeah. Everyone should smoke 8 packs of cigarettes a day and get as much sun as possible.
The atom, your bouncy friend. Bathe yourself in 8 hours of pure sunlight. These guys we're talking about ignorant people of the past, okay?
Right. We're not advocating this. We are laughing at the foolishness of our ancestors.
Right, yeah. You have to imagine that ancient peoples of a different era, that foolishness is long behind us, Kyle.
Oh, yes. We are so smart today. Smart.
Now, Kyle, this is a much more sophisticated, wacky, speaking of things that are much smarter. This is a
Yeah.
crazy kaleidoscope of things you've got going on here. Is
So
this
it looks a lot more sophisticated. It's basically the same thing.
okay?
Hmm. Okay, so this is what the actual text looks like. It's three
Okay.
lines. There's triangles, dots, and squares. And then I made them white, black, and medium gray so that I could later use a tritone effect to color them the way I wanted. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just sort of easier because then, when I get to that point, I can just do the coloring here instead of having to try to go back in and like individually select lines of characters and recolor them with the text panel. That gets a little a little fiddly. Okay.
Yeah.
But then you can see, in this case, let's dig into the text animators again. There's honestly only one text animator happening here, but it does have that expression selector,
Okay.
which I will point out. So you have, by default, you'll get a range selector when you select one of these. You saw a wiggly a minute ago. That's just kind of takes a property that you feed it and varies it within, some amount that you say. Or the expression selector, which is a little complex, which can do something. Okay. It's kind of up to you what you want it to do. In this case, all this code here is basically just saying, whatever this animation is, do that to every other character. Okay. Do that to the even numbered characters. Otherwise, do the opposite. And so every odd numbered character is getting the animation that I put onto these properties, and it's getting the inverse of that. And so
Right.
that's a pretty quick way to start creating this kind of, neat sort of dancey thing. See how like the triangles and the squares, they're just sort of alternating. And I just made kind of some basic looping keyframes on a position, scale, and rotation that are inside this animator. And then because I'm telling them each character to sort of invert what's happening there, it creates a lot of apparent complexity pretty quickly.
Valder is saying this looks like a DMV test. Maybe it's got a hypnotic pattern here.
Yeah. And so here is exactly what you just saw, just applied to a circle path, like you saw me do with the sun a minute ago. And then I'm using a little bit of sneakiness with some effects. I use the transform effect to make it all smaller. Okay. But then my old friend CC Composite to bring the original version of the layer and composite it back on top of this thing. So now I just doubled what I had by using those two effects. Okay. And then that tritone, remember I set these up in white, black, and gray so that I could color it at the end, and there it is. And so you could come in here and you could mess with these keyframes, play whatever you want. And again, you can download these project files and explore this for yourself. So you can do whatever you want on these keyframes, and it's going to be affecting out all of this. And you'll notice the middle too. When I scaled it, I inverted one of those so that it's reversed as well. Just adds more layers of visual complexity.
Wonderful. Now, Kyle, I didn't want to get upstage, so while you were doing that, if people noticed the consternation on my face, is because I was hastily coding this bad boy up. So there is a way that we can talk to the things that we've made in a repeated thing, and that is through one of these fun little things you can add into here, and that is the wiggle transform. And there's a wiggle paths as well, but let's do the wiggle transform. So the order of operations, we've got the single ray, right, of my sunshine here. I'm not hiding my light under a bushel, so I've moved this ray down there. Then we're repeating it around to generate this. Then we deploy the wiggle transform. So I'm going to go add wiggle transform, and I'm going to make sure that I put this under repeater 1. So this happens, then this happens. So we're going to be wiggling the transformation of all of these individual things. So let's just go ahead, and I'm going to say, okay, we're going to wiggle twice per second. The correlation is going to be at, say, 50%. So they'll kind of half be doing the same thing. And then you come down to the transform, and this is, what do you want to change about these? What do we want to change? I'm going to just change the position. So we're going to change that vertical position, and you can see what's happening already, right? They are moving towards and away from the center. I'm going to press play, and you see we're wiggling that property around. Now, why are they moving towards and away from the center? Well, because the repeater has bent them around. So we're wiggling the transformative property. Here is that transform that is being wiggled of these many repeated things.
Kind of, if you think about like what I just showed you with the text, it's effectively moving them off their baseline, you know?
Oh yeah. Well, and sorry, as Val was saying, it's just like vaporwave. Yes, it is. That's
I use techniques like this all the time for like if you need to visualize a waveform or something like that. It's much easier often to kind of fudge it and be able to stylize it better versus actually using the real audio if you don't need to.
Yeah, so here I'm gonna say set this to like 60, and let's just watch what happens as I play around with the correlation. So at correlation 100%, everything's happening at the same time. Correlation of 90%, and it looks like this. You can really see the seam here where the path basically starts and ends. So that's why you usually probably gonna need something like around 60, right, or something like that. Or what you might want to do is, maybe we bring this up to like a 90. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that layer and just go ahead and
crank it a little bit. Or maybe like a mirror effect or something. So it would be symmetrical, but you could hide your seams.
Exactly. So we're getting this kind of vibe going on. But that is the wiggle transform. We're wiggling something about the transformational properties that are happening. And like here, we're going to change the rotation a little bit on them. We're going to change the scale a little bit on them. And now we're getting some real chaos happening to this thing. Anyway, I felt like I hadn't.
Yeah, it's a great point.
We didn't squeeze enough juice out of this one before we move on. Because Kyle, my last example is not going to take that long, and it's a weird one.
It's a good one, but I'm really glad you showed this because also I love this kind of stuff. Just even if I'm not animating, just for design purposes, because you get that ability to kind of take your thing, put it around a path, and then still control it. Which Illustrator has gotten a lot better about being able to set up radial arrays and stuff, but a lot of that stuff, it kind of gets baked at a certain point, and it's harder to be able to mess with the pieces like you can in here. So, it's a good playground.
Here, I'm going to just kind of bring our position kind of down. I did a little bit of a scale wackadoo thing on here. Let's bring that down to like a 10, and rotation gets a little bit wacky, so maybe like a 2. But if we just bring our wiggles per second down to 0, we're literally just creating a random thing.
Yeah.
And you might say like, well, I want it to change sometimes. Like, yeah, cool. Well, that's why we can change our spatial phase.
Yeah.
Right. So I can rack that, and you can kind of see how it feels like the value is actually being shifted through the thing, and you can go forward and backward. And there's also the temporal phase. So these are two distinct kind of sliders that you can rock the rails on those. So that would be a very useful kind of, I don't know, even if we're just creating like design elements out of this.
Exactly.
It's got a good little weirdness. And similarly, I guess we should probably just go ahead and add the wiggly paths into this.
Yeah.
You can see that that's adding a similar type of weirdness to this. Now this is turning into some kind of like terrifying eyeball type of deal, but this is...
I love where it's going.
It's deploying a very similar type of thing. Maybe if I don't go corner, I go smooth, and I'm going to bring the detail down quite a lot. And you can kind of see that, now this is like the... I don't know what those parts of the eye are called. Cilia? Nope, those are the hairs on your tongue. I don't know. Let me know that in the chat. But you can see that we're able to now, we're wiggling the paths, the points and the curves of the paths themselves. So we have the ability to affect these large groups, large mass, system-wide changes, if you so desire. But anyway, we can do that. Okay, Kyle.
I do just need to call out real quick that the chat today is just in absolute fantastic form. Bravo to all of you.
We missed you, chat. Thank you for being with us. Okay, let's get into my final piece here.
Your final form.
I'm evolving into my final form. Okay, If you've been with us, you know that we can create these beautiful gritty arrays. So this is just done with an ellipse, and then I've used one repeater to repeat it horizontally. So we're getting 20 copies going boop, 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 horizontally, each one 100 pixels next to its neighbor. And then I'm repeating that again, and we're repeating that boop, 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 down 10 copies down to the bottom. Now, this composition is equirectangular, so that is twice as wide as it is tall. So an equirectangular object. And that, with all these pink dots, we've got a nice big old grid of pink dots. Now, the ones down at the bottom their opacity has been shifted. I went ahead and gave that a little shift for us, so it's a little bit easier for us to delineate which dots are where, right? And let's see, maybe I'll go 50% on that, and I'll go to repeater 1, and I'll do the same type of thing on that. So we sort of have a bright corner and a dark corner, if that helps. I don't know.
Helps me.
Chat, yeah. Kyle, is it helping you at least?
It is, yeah.
Okay, so this equirectangular comp, I've put that into a new space over here. I just drop it down in the old timeline, and then I apply the polar coordinates effect. So if you go to your effects and you're going to look up polar coordinates. Now, rather than telling you where the various Arctic and Antarctic research bases are, this is allowing us to specifically warp equirectangular things. I think it once upon a time had a very specific function, but now we just use it for whatever wacky thing we want. And what I want to do is say, I want to move from rectangular to polar, and I'm going to bend reality.
Whoa.
Like that. Okay, that was scary for a little bit, but then it turned into something towards the end.
We came through it together, though, and that's what matters.
Exactly. So you can see how we have actually bending this thing around. So Joel's doing some VR these days.
It is not fun, he says.
Oh, man, you're having so many different projection types now. My therapist says I need to stop projecting, but what do they know? Okay, so you can see what happened, right? Here is the brightest corner, right? And there is the darkest corner, and that is how it's been warped and remapped around. To help give you an even better idea, I'll just put a little grid. You can see this is the grid effect being applied over top here. So a nice even grid, and that turns into like a radar screen. If you need to make a radar screen, you're already done. You nailed it. So perfect. But this helps to sort of understand sort of effects-wise how we can bend something that we can really easily control, something like this, and warp it into a radial thing. So that is a bit of the challenge. Now, you're probably wondering, Evan, why are you doing this to us?
I was just wondering exactly that.
Yeah, well, it's so that we can have a good time with kind of warping this stuff around. So I'm going to go ahead and add, say, a new adjustment layer into here. And I'm going to add, actually, you know what? I don't need to add it into here. I can do all of this work out here. So pre-polar coordinates, I can put an offset on here. So I'm going to drop an offset onto here. And I'm just going to start.
ask you, Mr. Polar Coordinates, if you're watching the time. I think we're getting pretty close here.
I am, because I'm just going to grab the shift center here. I'm going to do this. So anyway, anything you animate within the grid will be reflected in the polar coordinates. It's a wacky solution. You can see how bent and deformed stuff starts to get in the kind of mid zone. There's really only one line of it that doesn't look totally warpified. But anyway, download this, play around with it.
For like pie charts and stuff too, though. Like if it's okay, if it's straight lines moving outwards, great for that.
Yeah. Anyway, so we've presented four unique, disparate techniques. So hopefully one of those will stick. There are a bunch of others. We should probably say while we're here on the program, there are a bunch of third-party plugins that you might enjoy. If you head on over to AE Scripts, you're going to see a bunch of those things. There's stuff by Fremix, I think. Fremox. I don't know how to pronounce that, but there's a bunch of different sort of providers that kind of take what we just did and turn it into kind of like a one-button solution.
Make it easier to set up. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, hopefully those are good ideas. We're going to be back at you next week with some other stuff, and then the week after that with some more stuff. But do let us know. We don't know what stuff yet because it's a mystery, even us. We'll figure it out after the show.
Sal is dropping into the chat. Please let us know what you want us to talk about, and then we will.
Yeah. And if you'd like to tell us personally, you can find us on the internet. I am at EC Abrams. Kyle, you can be found at Kylosaurus Rex. Those instructions are down at the bottom of the screen. And yeah, there's forums, motiondesignhotline.com, real website for real people with real projects for your real problems. Triple P. So that'll be it. Kyle, thanks for being with me. Thanks for hanging out. It's always a pleasure. And,
thanks, everybody.
Yeah, we'll see you next time. Until then, be creative, stay kind to each other, and we'll see you all around the internet. Bye for now.
Around the internet. Get it?
A raisey raise, a raise a raster.